the general public doesn't know how far this has gone. I mean, like now ChatGPT is the rage simply because it broke into mainstream. But if you start looking at
and Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E,
it's the same. But it's like it's the whole point when they break into mainstream. In some ways, then media picks up on it. Like, wow, now this is happening.
Well, the user experience becomes so simplified.
That's true.
That everyone can say, "Oh, now we hear something."
Vi vände hemåt, gick allting så fort.
Is it Swedish as well?
Där vid vägens kant var den sista gången vi sågs. Vad ska vi nu göra? Vår värld är i sig lik. Vårt barn, vår ängel borta är. Vi minns dig så som igår. Hon var bara 6 månader gammal, lilla tjej. När en galning ryckte bort vår kära vän, evigt förlorad. Nyss hon lär sig springa som vinden, lilla tjej. När en galning ryckte bort vår kära vän, evigt förlorad. Utan en chans, för den bilen bara kör. Och vi får aldrig veta vad hon skulle blivit. Vad ska vi
Wow. So
göra?
this was entered into the AI song contest
2021.
for 2021.
Last year.
Last year. So here we are listening to music generated by AI and some augmentation from humans.
Co-created, I would say.
Co-created.
AI, myself, and my colleagues, Daniel and Lisa. Listening.
And what is the AI song contest? Is it part of some conference or?
In 2020, some researchers had a crazy idea to have somewhat like a Eurovision contest, but focused on artificial intelligence. Could songs be created that can be competitive with the Eurovision Song Contest using AI? And the first year they had something like 13 entries from all over Europe and one from Australia.
Australia.
And they love song contests.
Yes, and they actually ended up winning.
Oh, really?
That one, yes.
So cool.
And as parts of this contest, you have to submit a document that describes how AI was involved in the process. And so that's a part of the package that is judged by a panel of judges, expert judges, but there's also a component of the public judging.
So it's both the subjective quality of it, but also the
professional,
the technical part of how it was created.
Somewhat, and the criteria by which the entries are judged is not that clear. They specify on the website, the variety of categories. And my colleague Rujing here is one of the judges on the AI Song Contest, and became involved through working with myself on the Mosaic project at KTH here. And then in 2021, there was something like 30 entries. And then last year, or this year, there was 43. So it's really ballooned in popularity.
Who is competing? Is it mainly universities, or is it also other?
In the beginning, it was researchers at universities, and now it's gotten to the point of people have access to these great tools online, and you can start creating immediately. You don't need to have a degree in computer science to get these things running. And so anyone with an internet connection, and maybe somebody with a GPU can be doing some stuff at home. But you have a much wider group of people competing in this competition.
Yeah. So, and please give some details about this song that we'll just listen to. How was that created?
The melody comes from a system that we developed called FolkRNN. It's a recurrent neural network that's trained with a vocabulary that's sort of made to be expressive for Irish traditional dance music. And it's expressed in sort of a symbolic format using text or characters called ABC notation. And we devised a representation that you could essentially feed one hot encoded vectors in the vocabulary. There's 137 elements in the vocabulary, and it goes through 3 layers of long short-term memory units into a final layer of softmax that you can sample from over the vocabulary. And you build up these transcriptions character by character, token by token. And so this system that we developed does exactly this. It treats these tunes as if they're sentences made of symbols, and it learns to produce the statistics it learns to extract the statistics of it and reproduce things like it.
So now, what does that mean? Does that mean sort of that when you're representing it now like text, it can understand which phrases fits well together, i.e. how a melody logically flows?
Not necessarily melody, but the sentence, the sequence of symbols.
Okay.
And these kinds of models, these long short-term memory networks or recurrent neural networks in general, build up these conditional probability distributions that are different depending on the order. So the system has seen these 5 specific tokens. Like it's got the meter, it's got the mode, it's got the first 3 notes. And the system is asked, what's the most probable next note, or what's a likely next note or symbol?
And so the tune evolves from, if we start with these 3 tones, typically this song would go in this pattern here.
Yeah, and so it learns to, from the left to right, it learns to build up these symbols. Now we look at it in terms of music, where we know how to interpret the symbols and how to perform it on our instruments, and then we can make judgments of whether it's good or not. But all it knows is this next symbol has to be a C, given these 3, because this is the training item that I have seen. And so the training procedure is, all right, push your weights this way and this way so that you have more probability weight on that specific token. And we build in no musical knowledge whatsoever. It's only looking at tens of thousands of transcriptions of Irish traditional dance tunes. And it has this emergent property of building up sequences that are musically plausible, by and large, extremely good quality, let's say. Not all of them are winners. And this melody in this song that was used is a reject from a critic that I built to try to find the most characteristic Irish jigs in a collection of 100,000 generated by the system. It was rejected, and I said, okay, let's look through the rejections to make sure the critic is working right. I found this one. No, it's not a jig. Definitely not. But I liked it enough that I kept it to the side to say I'm going to use it in some musical project later. And that's how it came to into this song.
And then you go on, because from the RNN, what happens next?
We took that melody. We needed an accompaniment to build some item. You don't just want to play the melody by itself. You want to have some stuff around it to decorate it. And so I took it to another AI system called Music Transformer, which was developed by Anna Huang at Google Magenta. This was part of her Ph.D. in 2018. And this is a transformer network that can be conditioned on the melody to build a piano accompaniment, because it's been trained on hundreds of hours of piano performances recorded at a disc clavier, which is a mechanical piano that it detects how fast and which key you press. And so it's been trained on all this, and it can say, okay, it's got this melody, what's the underlying harmonic progression and the accompaniment? And so I put this melody into the system. It created several accompaniments, and I chose from one of those and then arranged it a little bit more, fixed some errors, and then that's what you hear presented by essentially a robotic piano called a disc clavier. Yamaha makes this piano that can just play itself.
So we also have Rujing with us, I think, on the network. I'm not sure. Can you hear us, Rujing? Maybe not. But she was part of the song contest in some way, you said?
She started judging in 2021.
So she was part of some jury, or is...
Yeah, she's part of the jury and sort of the helping spearhead this effort.
Okay.
And bringing more people on board. And as the number of submission grows, of course, the number of judges must grow too, because it becomes too time consuming.
So many questions, rising from this. Who's really the owner of this song? Is it you, or is it?
I would say it is me, or it is myself, Daniel, and Lisa,
right?
Who sang it and produced it and helped. In a sense, we were writing it together. We were exploring a variety of ideas from the beginning. First, the idea we had for the 2021 song contest was built around a rather stupid tune called the Cuckoo's Wedding that the system had, a first version of our system that learned to title the tunes, created this rather ridiculous tune and named it the Cuckoo's Wedding. And so we were thinking about have a story about a wedding in a forest and using this tune, etc. But then it wasn't working, and I came up with another idea, which was this rather tragic song about the tragic experience that my wife and I had in the beginning of the pandemic, is when our 6-year-old puppy died because ran into the road. And so we, this was a way to work through my grief, in a sense. It was I wouldn't have ever thought to do it by myself. I didn't have the courage, but working together with a chatbot to sort of describe the situation and write some poetry about it, and selecting lines that was generated by the computer helped me sort of get through it. And my colleagues, Lisa and Daniel, agreed that this would be a good way to go for the song. So,
So do you see the AI used in this co-creation of the song as more of a tool, or can it be a participant similar to the humans as well?
I think I was kind of a participant, like a therapist would be a participant in one's life. Not necessarily the author, but a guide.
But to you, it's the involvement is more than calling it a tool.
Yeah, I would say this is much more than a tool. It's not an effects pedal.
No, exactly.
It's something that responds at a high level, I would say, to topics.
Hi, Rujing. Can you hear us now?
Yes, now you're here. Yeah, I never left the room, actually.
Yeah, I know. That's just the system just rejected the microphone, but we can see you and hear you in real time here. We are joined by Bob and Anders and Henrik here.
Yeah.
Hi,
welcome, Rujing.
Nice to meet you, Rujing.
Nice to meet you. I just can't see the video, and that's okay, right?
Yeah. We just spoke about the AI song contest here with Bob. And you've been involved in that for some time, right? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, I started being a part of the organizing team in the 2021, which is the contest second year. Yeah. And then we've now completed our third edition of AI Song Contest, and now we're actually busy preparing for the fourth edition. Yeah, so I joined in the second year.
Were you part of the jury in some way, trying to select the winner, or?
Yes. So the jury process, we're still working to improve it year after year. But yes, for at least the first 3 years, the organizing team is also part of the jury team. But we also have a much bigger board of expert jury members besides the organizers.
Any AI being part of selecting the winner yet?
Not yet. That was actually, that was an idea that definitely was brought up at some point, I think, this year, including an AI judge. Yeah. I think that was mentioned.
That would be really...
Haven't acted on that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting so many submissions, you're going to need it to scale.
That's the point, right?
Yeah, if everyone is going to contribute with songs, you probably need some kind of scaling for the selection as well. And can you just elaborate? How do you select the song? What kind of criteria or judgment process do you have there?
It's great that actually, I think I have our document pulled. Yes, I actually thought that this might be asked, so I have our process document on my screen right now. So the way it works is as part of the submission, the team submission process, the teams do not only have to submit their song, but accompanying the song is actually usually 3 to 4 page long process document. So we have kind of a template, which I'm looking at now, a process document template that we made accessible to the teams after they enter the contest. So basically, there are several categories of content that they have to write about and reflect on about the whole process. So it's actually a very process-oriented contest. So it's not just the final song. We very much care about the human AI co-creation process. So yeah, I just let you know the 4 categories we have. Number 1 is kind of the song itself, right? So then the song itself, the way we judge this is we'll first always listen to the song without looking in the process document, just appreciating the song as a song.
Like a subjective kind of experience of the quality in some way.
Yes, exactly. Just judging the song, on its own. And then I'm looking here, there's a workflow, so kind of the AI, the process of including AI in the songwriting process. There is also a diversity, ethical, cultural considerations part. And so there's a lot that goes under that category. For instance, there's data ethics, right? So teams are asked to also kind of specify whether they have, how they access the data set and kind of do they have the rights to using it. So there's that. There's, I think, a collaboration teamwork segment. So yeah, and then there's one category that's called pushing boundaries of creative expression. So kind of whether AI is actually, pushing the boundaries of the creative process. So yeah, there's different.
Super interesting, and I'm getting to think about the RoboCup. So in other AI conferences, there is this competition for robots to play soccer or football, and the goal there is that in 2050, the winner of the Robot League should be winning over the winner in the human world championship, like that we're seeing right now. So we'll see who wins the human championship right now, but potentially in 2050, the winning team in soccer in RoboCup will actually win over the humans potentially. Do you think the same thing will happen between Eurovision Song Contest and AI Song Contest? That at some point, they will merge and they will compete together, and someone will win over the other?
You mean the AI kind of creator versus the human creator?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for the contest, at least for the first few years, we've really been focusing on, so it's, in a way you can't really win the competition if you just have a one-click, like 100% AI generated song process. So it's kind of focusing a lot on that kind of human involvement as a co-creator of the AI partner. Right. So, yeah. But then there's another extreme of, I think we're in the industry and where you see a lot of push for kind of the convenience, the fast, right? So kind of really getting human out of the picture, right? I think that's also happening. So I think at least for the contest, at the moment, we're still focusing on kind of that process of co-creativity.
Bob, what do you think about the future of the AI Song Contest? Do you think they will merge and that become a natural part of the Eurovision Song Contest in the future? That, in 10 years, anyone entering the Eurovision Song Contest may have using AI as a co-creation partner, so to speak, for any song and potentially... Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it hasn't already happened, there are popular artists using artificial intelligence in their workflow.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, it could be something as simple as mastering or mixing the final product. It's definitely in the synthesis of sounds. And we do see...
Already today, you mean?
Yeah, more and more albums are being produced where AI is marketed as a part of the product.
And then when we talk about algorithms in the music industry, I mean, like you can go into auto-tuning and all different kinds of ways how we have used AI to perfect the sound. or cheat. I don't know. I don't know.
I would love to have an AI autotuner that helps me to sing karaoke a bit better. But,
I think the kind of the next step, what we're going to see very soon, is actually to have these AI components sort of incorporated as plugins in the DAWs. I think that's already happening. Right? I think by there are already companies working on that. And recently we had that. I think the artist winning a painting competition in the story was the New York Times, right? Winning a painting competition with a totally AI generated drawing. So yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Should we do the proper introduction?
Yeah, let's do that. And very welcome here, Bob Sturm. Finally, we've been trying to get you on the show for some time, but let's make a short introduction at least. And you're an associate professor in KTH, focusing on AI, signal processing, music, audio in general. I don't think we have spoken that much. I think I met you at least once speaking at your conference that you had at some point, I believe. But I have a number of friends, including Carl to me and others, that speaks very highly of you. So I'm very happy to have you here.
My pleasure.
And then we have Rujing Huang. Welcome. And you're in Hong Kong, right? You're calling in from Hong Kong. What time is it there now?
Past midnight, 12:21 a.m. How I roll these days.
Yeah.
And could you please introduce yourself and what do you do in Hong Kong?
Yes, so I'm now, so my background is ethnomusicology. I got my Ph.D. in ethnomusicology in 2019. So now I'm based at the University of Hong Kong in the music department. So yeah, my research actually from my dissertation, my Ph.D. years was very, very different from what I'm doing now. So it was actually on ancient Chinese sacrificial music and its contemporary revivals. And then I got into creative music AI in late 2020. So my research since then has been focusing on specifically kind of thinking about the ethics and cultural politics of creative AI. So kind of, examining this whole thing from a humanistic perspective. And besides that, yes, I'm also a co-organizer in the AI song contest.
And you've been collaborating on research right now, right?
Yes, since 2020.
Yes.
I have a project, ERC Consolidator grants, for a project called Music at the Frontiers of Artificial Intelligence and Creativity. And the first parts of that project started in 2020 with an advertisement for postdocs. And I got a variety of excellent applications, including Rujing. And she was top choice. I said, come join me in Stockholm. And she came from after completing her Ph.D. at Harvard. And it was right during the pandemic, too. So we didn't really meet each other in person until several months after she had arrived.
Could you even travel to Stockholm, or did you start your position, remote, so to speak?
I think December 2020 is when I arrived in Stockholm. It was a strange time because I didn't really see many people in Stockholm. It was kind of a lockdown.
Yeah. But then by February, it was Simla season. We were meeting each other in person and working on some very interesting questions around artificial intelligence involved in traditional music. And in tradition, and looking at the value systems that play within traditional music and how artificial intelligence sort of short circuits these things. So we wrote a paper together about authenticity and the aura of music when artificial intelligence is involved. And since that time, we've expanded to looking at ethics and different philosophical frameworks, not only in the West, but also the East, of how researchers and users and consumers perceive the involvement of machines in products of art. And so that's
and of course, this is so to the point 2022 when we have the whole Dali and everything, and everybody's questioning, is this art, and who is owning the art, and how will this affect the art community? And now we talk about the music community, so it's right on point for 2022, I would say.
Yeah, I think we should add a topic here about the ethics of generative AI, I guess, in general here, and speak much more about
I would really like to have some of the essence of these papers, how you can see that. And I find it extremely interesting when you go traditional culture or like folk music and stuff like that, and really that's like you go to the other side of the spectrum. You're not going to a high-tech community and see how AI affects that, but how do we interpret that in this sort of very authentic arena? Very interesting.
And perhaps before we move into the really interesting questions, or this is an interesting one as well, but perhaps you can give a short introduction to your background as well, Bob, and your background coming to this kind of profession.
Yes. I've since 2018 I've been in Stockholm.
Yes.
And joined KTH. But before then, I've been in Europe since 2009. I started a postdoc in France where I was doing music signal processing. Did that for 10 months, then moved to Denmark, Aalborg University Copenhagen for 5 years, where I taught in a media arts and technology program, let's say, and started to develop an appreciation for machine learning. Before that time, I had specialized in electrical engineering, signal processing, physics, computer music composition. And then after Denmark, I got a position at Queen Mary, the Center for Digital Music, where I became an assistant professor in digital media there.
Was this approximately?
That was 2015.
15.
And so moved to London, and London was great.
Yeah.
Being an academic in the UK, not so much. And ever since we had experience.
What's the problem with it?
It's too close to the American way of doing things. Let's say it's the work-life balance. It's the very harsh capitalism, the economic system there. After experiencing Denmark, we were like, look, we need to get back to Scandinavia as soon as possible.
Yeah,
and so this position in KTH came up, and so I jumped at that. And so since that time, I've almost forgotten about physics. Signal processing has been replaced by machine learning research.
What do you think about that? I mean, I know some friends, into control theory and these kind of things, and it's getting increasingly replaced by machine learning. Some people hate it, some people adapt it and like it. What's your thought about that?
The fundamentals are always important. I mean,
you have to learn and understand.
We see things being reinvented in computer science that have been around for a long time in signal processing, and that's refreshing. Let's say, but there are where machine learning really kicks is when there's data. And in for many problems, it's data poor, and you need to rely on expert knowledge. You need to rely on these ways to get your system up and running quickly without having to learn everything from the start, right? And that's where these fundamental principles from signal processing or operation control theory, even probability theory come in and help.
So learning the fundamentals and understanding them can benefit a lot in machine learning and AI.
Oh yeah,
as well.
And when I'm current sort of pursuit of mine in research is looking at the internal mechanisms of these machine learning models. Who knows all the data that they've been trained on? 1 million tracks, 30-second tracks of music, and you've got matrices, that are embedded in this convolutional neural network. But how can you interpret them? And you can use basic tools of signal processing to look at them in the frequency domain and sort of understand what they're sensitive to and these properties. So I'm finding that the signal processing knowledge very useful.
Right. I can see that. And perhaps we should just move also over to Rujing. And what's your current? I mean, you did your PhD as well, and you did a postdoc as well with Bob as well. What's the current focus for you?
So yeah, I'm kind of right now. So yes, PhD, working on the contemporary revivals of ancient Chinese ritual music, and then the first postdoc getting into cultural politics of AI. So kind of really on two ends of time, I would say. And then now, so at Hong Kong, I'm essentially multitasking. I'm I'm teaching a class actually on music business right now, and research-wise, yes, kind of going at the same time with the AI path and also the Chinese sacrificial music one, which I will develop and which is my dissertation into a book. But most of the new paper research projects are actually AI related, and the latest project I'm working on is actually getting more into the questions of labor theory, and kind of thinking about artistic labor in the age of AI, right? So kind of also the issues of musical talent, virtuosity, skill, right? Kind of all these notions, the meanings are shifting now that AI is in the picture.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. So you said labor theory. Is that basically how AI and machines will influence the labor market in some way, or what do you mean?
Kind of how you, right. So I guess how you understand, how we can understand the concept of musical work, right? Mm-hmm. If that makes sense, right? So, now that you have so many one-click options, via AIAW or Boomi to create a song, right? So now, what does skill mean? What does musical skill and mean in a music creator or in a musician, right? When you can do the one-click solution and sell your song being identified as the artist on Apple Music, that kind of creates a lot of interesting questions about, kind of authorship and virtuosity in creative work.
What does skill mean?
Skill.
Yeah, what does skill mean?
What does skill mean? So that's kind of the question I'm asking too right now.
Do you have an answer yet?
So I think there's what's happening now in the musical world is actually. So I gave recently gave a very short talk about this too, kind of the process of de-skilling. I think AI, at least in part, is causing de-skilling, right? Yes. So which is. In the art world, I think the art world has actually gone through this. So there was a lot of kind of writings in art history and art criticism about how you transform from the artisanal studio to the artisanal workshop to the artist studio, right? Where a lot of the traditional skills associated with the master musician are now kind of shedded and kind of redistributed among different experts. So now what the artist needs to do is actually a much smaller set of skills than the traditional kind of artisan in that sense. So I think in the music world right now, you essentially have a very different network of music makers, right? So for instance, in the AI song contest, we have all these technologists, right? The AI scientists and developers who's never written a song before, right? Because this writing a song was traditionally not their job and not kind of in that arena. So, but now with AI, you suddenly see a very different picture of who is involved.
Could you say that AI is democratizing music creation in some way, or?
Yeah, it's really interesting you mention that, because that's exactly the title of my paper. It was it's question. It's democratizing music and a question mark, and kind of also looking into this notion of democratization, which is all of this is kind of at the moment what I'm thinking about and writing about.
It looks like you were shaking your head, Bob, on this question.
Yeah, using the term democratizing, technology democratizes.
Yeah,
I think it's difficult to place political theory on technology. I think it's accessibility, or it may be removing boundaries to markets or to listeners, but there's no voting, in terms of.
So it's a term democratizing.
So we are using quite nonchalantly different terms, and we are sometimes forgetting that when we say democratizing, that has a very deep political meaning in terms of what is a democracy and what is just in this sense.
I mean, in a sense.
But we have used that word in so many different aspects now, so it's almost lost its fundamental meaning, semantic, right? And you're now flipping it. Saying, well, is it really democratizing a good word, or is it better words here that is
socializing,
accessibility,
right,
stuff like that? Okay, so you're pointing out the semantics,
Sorry, what did you say, Rujing?
I was just saying that I think there's still a difference to be made between now that everyone can have different more platforms to be creative with, and more people can now make music. Between that and the trope of everyone is now an artist, right? I think that's there's still a difference there to be made. And so yes, the question of what does it mean when we say that AI is democratizing art and music? Because that's actually how I started this project, when I was just doing some random Google search about kind of stories and news about creative AI. Democratization is the word that just keeps popping up. It's that number one marketing slogan for all the startups. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, at least myself, it's an interesting thing here. We have so many people on the podcast, and it seems to be an unproportional number of people that have a passion for both music and technology. I'm not sure really why. I feel a bit left out because I really can't sing, or I can't play an instrument really well, or create music. But I know you, Henry, can. Goran is an expert in this. We have other people like Robert Luciani. They are both masters in both technology and music. And for me, I'm looking forward to the time when I can use AI to at least start to produce stuff and be creative in music as well. And at least it's something that I think is a positive thing for me personally, at least, and I think potentially for a lot of people in society.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice if you can explore other modes of expression, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone should be, and you can do that without technology in a sense, right?
No, I tried, but I failed.
A rubber band, put it across a tissue box that's empty, and there you have a nice
I can't even
little
sing,
stringed instrument.
So how can I?
But maybe.
That's I mean.
Sorry, what, Rishi?
I was saying a theremin.
Yeah, theremin, don't have to touch it.
Right.
But I find that really, really interesting, and it goes all the way down to who's the artist and what is an artist. Because sometimes I believe you have, in order to have something sound good on a piano or a guitar, you need to have a certain level of virtuosity or skill, right? To actually, you have a music in your head, and you actually have a beautiful song in your head, but you don't really have the skills to express it. But with the right technology and tools, someone who has the creativity of this tune as a composer, but not the skill to make it happen in a physical piano or something like that, I think that's a huge opportunity for and expression and artistry that creates new artists that sort of felt the sort of burden.
Yeah, one difficulty too is to realize that it's not the end song, it's the product. It's not writing that finished song or having mastered to play that song on the piano and sing at the same time, but it's the process of working towards that you start to learn about yourself, your body, the instrument itself, the worlds, how you respond to things. It's a journey. It's not just that end product. It's the piece.
And will that be different with AI or the same? Because it's a process again.
I think parts are short-circuited. It's like solving a crossword by using Google search on the crossword clues, right? Going through the process of elimination and then turning the meaning of the words over in your mind.
Yep.
Right? There's some aspect of that people find satisfying.
Yep.
Right? I find when I write music, it's solving problems. And sometimes it's really frustrating, and I hate it. I find it painful. And I love to use tools like Folk RNN or Music Transformer to give me options to start from, because then it's like I get going faster
and it
I
opens
go
up
further.
your mind. Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And so I find them, and this goes back to your question earlier about, are these tools or are these partners? I find them to be partners in the sense that if they would be gone, if they'd be erased from the internet, I'd be at a loss. They contribute that much to my music, I feel.
So they give you inspiration in your creative process. They give you cues in the creative process that is a tool doesn't give you cues in this sense.
Yeah, I would say they don't give me inspiration. They give me gasoline. They give me oil.
Yeah, okay.
To move faster, to make the journey smoother.
I like that.
And I go to places I would never have considered before. And this is another thing I really enjoy about AI, I enjoy several things about AI involved in the music process, but when they make mistakes and when they do weird things, that's oftentimes musically right, or it's musically interesting. I don't want to create a system that generates the best Irish sounding jigs and reels, because we already have lots of those. I want to find tunes that are weird and quirky, that would never be considered an Irish tradition, but can be kind of brought and kind of challenge the patterns that exist in Irish traditional music.
And perhaps be able to create more music on the long tail, so to speak, that normal people don't have the time otherwise to create, because it's not, the audience is sufficient for it. Yeah. I know, Rujing, that it's very late in your time. It's after midnight already, and you have to leave soon. So I would love to...
No worries. I'm surprisingly awake, so no worries.
Thanks for that. But let's. I would love to just focus on some of your favorite research questions as well. And how would you phrase it? Is it ethics of generative AI? Is that a good phrasing, or what would be your passion right now?
So yeah, I think based on different paper, different research project, we are focusing on different sets of questions. For instance, and I think I actually find all of them really interesting. So I probably can't rank an order of kind of interest among them. But for instance, I found at least the Izmir paper that we did, we put together with Bob in 2021. I found that to be a really fun experiment, actually. So it was, Bob mentioned that briefly before, thinking about how Oriental kind of East Asian philosophy can inspire our thinking about ethical music AI, which was, it's something that I would have never just come to think of, right, before joining this research team. And I remember that idea just came out of a small chat between me and Bob, thinking about what we should do next. And just, ideas came out of these very casual conversations. So, and I think that was actually from another Google search when I was just looking at news, and I realized, oh, there's this really interesting article titled How Confucianism Could Put Fears About Artificial Intelligence to Bed. I was like, very interesting. So then that's kind of how we went down this route, because I do have a little bit of a background in classical Chinese philosophy. I used to be the teaching fellow of this huge class at Harvard, which is the number 3 most popular class at Harvard. That's essentially on classical Chinese music philosophy. So classical Chinese philosophy, not music. That's more specific. But that class has over 600 students every semester. And so, I was part of that team. So we kind of went through all the different schools of Chinese philosophy. In a very early times. So essentially...
Yeah. Can you just elaborate how, it's very interesting. I think philosophy is also a passion of mine. I think it's super interesting. But so I'm hearing a bit that, you're looking into how the Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, etc., is influencing music creation, I guess, in some way.
Or AI.
Or is AI connected in some way? Or how is that connection between music, Chinese philosophy, and AI really working?
Mm-hmm. So for this specific paper that I'm talking about, we were specifically looking at the ethical principles that were outlined in one of these IEEE documents. I think it's called Ethically Aligned Design. So they in this document, it's outlined kind of there are 8 ethical principles, right, for any kind of creation of ethical AI and automatic systems. So it's like human rights, well-being, misuse, accountability, so all these concepts. So kind of the way we went with this was kind of thinking about these concepts, but now considering a different philosophical framework, and then see how they can potentially apply in the music AI field. So it's very specific, and it was a very fun exercise. I think it was just a fun thinking experiment for me too.
So I'm struggling a bit here to try to nail down the question. How can Chinese philosophy influence music creation or AI music creation?
More broadly speaking,
one example I can give support.
Sorry,
go ahead.
More broadly speaking, it's the involvement of technology, and how you see something that's more agency than a tool, than a guitar pedal, let's say, that it's rising to the ranks of author.
Right.
And we see ethically aligned design, version 2.0, that's promoted by the IEEE of how to design systems, the ways to think to minimize harm, to maximize benefits, to increase well-being, to minimize chance of misuse, etc. And we wanted to see how that translates to East Asian contexts. And is there a similar kind of unsettled feeling about involving technology in these pursuits in East Asia?
So, just to get, if I understand my angle here, I mean, like ethics is highly connected to a culture, community, to context. So what is considered ethical in Sweden might not be considered ethical in another part of the world, and vice versa.
It's connected to values.
So the value systems. Yeah. So now you're talking about AI ethics as the models and the 8 dimensions that you explained, and now you put that towards, for instance, Confucianism, values and value system. And you see how do we get to somewhere else then?
Yes. Go ahead, Rujing.
Yeah, I just thought of maybe one or two specific examples, right? So there is a classical ancient philosopher called Mozi, and he's kind of the creator of the Mohism school of philosophy, which is not as known, I think, these days to at least the people in the West. But yeah, he has this one entire chapter in his book, which is called Condemnation of Musical Performances. So his whole point is that he was actually arguing against extravagant musical performances that was wasteful. So we kind of went from there and kind of think about the very energy-consuming large neural networks, right? And then kind of going into there's already discussion about how with streaming and AI, the kind of the carbon footprint of music creation has actually increased, right? So kind of thinking there about the environment and eco-musicology a little bit. And then, then there is also the question of excess, right? Of overproduction, of abundance, right? Is it better to keep creating, producing, or is it also a time to think about the reduction rather than the production of music? So yeah, some of these questions, and that could be related to, for instance, Lao Tzu, the philosopher, who is a founding figure of Taoism, who actually talks a lot about kind of the negative, the non-action, the kind of the empty, rather the reducing rather than the addition. So there's a lot of this. And lastly, the question of personhood, right? So this is not specifically about music, but just in terms of what is a person. Is AI a member of our society, or is AI a tool, or what's the subjectivity of AI? And this actually, I think, is very helpful to kind of bring in some of these Asians philosophy, which has a very different argument about what makes an kind of actor qualify as a human, right? So Confucianism has a very different theory about what makes a human. So it's not in this case actually AI, in the Confucian sense, AI can be considered a human and a member of the society once it fulfills a certain societal roles, because it's a very role-based understanding of personhood. So kind of a lot of these fundamental concepts we're trying to read.
And I see what this is going, because we came into the topic when we've had other professors here who has worked in Japan, for instance, and how come there is such an acceptance of robots in society, and how can that be? And you can trace it back to Confucianism or an item. Everything is all this. Everything has a spirit. A stone has a spirit, or you can trace it back to how Confucianism now plays. What is a person? It's the role, and all of a sudden the robot can take a role. So it's a person, which is completely different to Western philosophy, I guess.
Right. And in Taoism, it will be qi, right? It will be the vital energy. Everything has energy. Exactly. Yeah. In Shintoism, right? In Japan. So there's spirit, and in Taoism, there's different level of vital energy that is present in all the life or lifeless, so-called lifeless objects.
But is it a fair assumption or theory, hypothesis, that for cultures that coming from these types of philosophies, they will have a much easier time to embrace robotics, or that it will be more pervasive, faster, the use of AI in those cultures than in...
It would be more accepted?
More accepted, easier. That is almost proven already, I guess.
Bob and I, we had this book chapter in which just came out recently with also another collaborator, in which we interviewed a lot of the practitioners of creative AI in Asia. And actually, when we spoke to the Japanese
Professor
scholar,
Ishiguro-san.
Right. And so, yes, there's, I think, apparently a really much higher acceptance of robots as a member of the society. And if you look at the AI principles in Japan, actually, there is a clause, which you don't see in other kind of Western AI ethical principles. So in Japan, there's a principle that basically kind of says how AI can become a quasi-member or a member of society. That's actually in their document. And in Chinese, the Beijing AI principle, there is one of the key principles is actually the concept of harmony, right? When AI, how can AI harmonize the society? And harmony comes from, it's one of the core Confucian concepts too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Professor Ishiguro-san, who we interviewed for this chapter, he's the one that has developed humanoid robots that look like himself.
Really?
In addition to others. I'm sure you've seen this in the news.
Is it the Honda robot thing, or is it the...
No, it actually looks like him.
Oh.
It's very lifelike.
Interesting.
And he was gracious enough to give me an hour of his time to interview him. And he's worked on robots that perform Buddhist rites. So in the temple, the robot is reciting the chant.
Really?
And I asked him, aren't people offended by this? Because if you do this in a Catholic church, it would be sacrilegious. It would be a cheapening of the ritual. Mm-hmm. He says, no, that the monks, they like and appreciate, they embrace anything that focuses the message on Buddhism. And this robot does that.
Would you say that in the Eastern Asian society, they are a bit more open-minded and forward-minded even into matters like this?
I'm not sure, Rujing.
I think Japan is a very special case. I wouldn't generalize actually much beyond that, because you haven't seen that, for instance, in China, in the Chinese world. And with Japan is a society that's a lot about, I think it has a very interesting dynamics between change and non-change, right? About preserving the tradition, continuity, heritage, and then about kind of radical technological developments. You see them kind of embracing both at the same time. And I do think that idea of everything having kind of a life and spirit is a huge part of how kind of the robot agents are more accepted. And because I see that robots are now being a huge part of kind of elderly care in Japan. So a lot of the robots are actually helping, kind of being the household carer of a lot of the elderly in Japan, which hasn't happened in China. And in China, right? You're starting to see kind of virtual artists, musicians, AI. So it's starting to happen a lot and become much more visible. And I kind of see 50-50 of love and hate. So I wouldn't say that it would be the same story in other parts of East Asia, at least.
But I find this conversation is super interesting, but also very hard. Because if I only have really experience with Western culture and values, I can try to, with my understanding, reflect on how I think they understand it, like in China or in Japan. But I still it's hard to take the real empathic listening and really putting myself in someone else's shoes because I don't have the value system. So I really literally need to study the value system deeply as a way to come back to the question from another angle. Is that fair?
Yeah, of course. And that's why we interviewed several practitioners and researchers in East Asia to get these perspectives in a variety of different countries. It wasn't just Japan and China. Korea, Thailand.
Right. Thailand. And the Thailand scholar, the Thai scholar we interviewed has a really interesting book about Buddhism and how Buddhism can inform our thinking about AI ethics too. It's an interesting book.
That's the thing that I've found in research. I'm in the computer science department. Yeah. The project I'm running is an ERC project that's funded from a panel that is not computer science, it's humanities.
Oh, really?
And the majority of work that we're doing is on sort of the outside of computer science looking in a sense. I haven't promised work packages on algorithms and data sets, etc. But we are trying to involve practitioners, experts outside our domain to reflect on the challenges that this technology could bring and brings now. Yeah. And the conversation is constant. You have to keep talking and talking and talking. It's not like an engineering problem where the solution is done and that's how you solve the problem. This ethical reflection requires revisiting and further reading and thinking again, okay, maybe this particular statement isn't true anymore. And it's this constant back and forth that we have to have this conversation. And it is difficult because it's sort of longitudinal. You have to keep having it.
I guess it's similar to what you speak about a lot, Henrik, which is, having AI being adopted in business in some way is much more than technological development, and it is much more about also culture development.
Organization, team topologies, values of the company.
Right.
And not until you get to those roots of what becomes, if you want to adopt AI at scale. Simply put, the way we have done it in the analog way and what is efficient organization in the past for a stable process, for instance, and now we're going to have a very adaptive process and we're going to add data and algorithms. It's a completely different value system, and therefore the organizational patterns, the practices are the old patterns are anti-patterns when you try to go this way. And you need to break that. It's like down to the real quanta of the being of the company. And I find it, so to address this topic, if I take it to business, is actually addressing the value system. How do we make money? And a simple example, right? In business, we have gone down a path from Adam Smith to sort of the Friedmans and all that, and we came to the core conclusion that the purpose of a corporation is shareholder value. And now, somewhere in the 60s, 70s, Peter Drucker says, well, actually, that's not true. That's a result. The core only purpose of any corporation or any business is to create value for their customers. And if you do that well, then you can have results. That will give you shareholder value. So basically, by that simple, Adam Smith put us on a path here that sort of that leads down a path that you need to, the whole value system is wrong. And now we have built very successful businesses around that when the economies are stable, when what you're producing as a product is fairly stable, and you maximize efficiency to maximize shareholder value. And now we get to a state of complete innovation pressure, complete innovation accelerating innovation, where you constantly need to adapt to the marketplace, and therefore you constantly need to adapt to what is value that the customer is seeking, and therefore you need to have a completely different mindset. And this is on a huge macro level. If we zoom all the way out, I get what you're saying here. If we want to talk about ethics, and if we want to talk about these things, we need to really zoom out of our dogma and value systems of one culture and see this on a much broader perspective, like you are doing now. I'm getting a little bit blown away when I'm starting to trying to articulate what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm?
Absolutely. And the longer I've been a member of academia, the more I start to realize it's not very different from business industry.
It is.
We still are adapting quickly to the customers, whether they're students or they're people that hire the students. We're in search of money, of course. We're in search of results in terms of patents and publications. And
you have your metrics.
Absolutely. KPIs, all of that. We just don't call them that. Exactly. And we're no less free of considerations of ethics.
No.
We still have to consider them. So we may not be directly in the game of making profits for shareholders, but we do have shareholders in the sense of people that run the universities, that have degrees from that university, depend on that name.
Interesting. Should we try before? I know that time is running out for you soon, Rujing. But if you can keep you on for a short time more, I'm thinking about the question that is more like, okay, if we think about generative AI in general, of course, music creation is your specialty, and that's super interesting. But we can also think about all the things that happened just in a recent year or last years with, of course, GPT and DALL-E and now chatbot and whatnot, and it seems like we are seeing the whole generative AI being able to create from a single prompt or a question in all type of modalities when it comes to text, images, and I guess music is just next the line in some ways. Just prompting in some way, and you can get your own song being generated, and I'm sure that's coming along very shortly.
Well, it's already there. I mean, jukebox.
All right.
It sounds like it's on an AM radio.
And that's the NVIDIA jukebox thing, or which?
OpenAI.
Okay, OpenAI.
So OpenAI is behind ChatGPT, and they also have jukebox.
Jukebox,
Right. Yeah. Can
Jukebox
you just elaborate how that does that work?
I don't know. I just know.
How do you use it? Can it basically prompt it to generate things, or?
Yeah, you can. Well, it's not. Well, there are models to work with online. I've never worked with them. It's more. It takes more work to get them to operate than ChatGPT, which is already there already, or Hugging Face, for instance, Stable Diffusion. Yeah. But you can say Frank Sinatra plus Eminem. Yeah. You can give maybe a song of a title or a style, and it generates tracks that do have that sound like Frank Sinatra or what have you. Long term, the music doesn't really hold together, but it's getting there.
And it is getting there. And I guess these are just, the first kind of initial attempts that you have in having really powerful generative AI in different ways. So I guess one question perhaps to you, Rujing, would be, what kind of ethical challenges do you see when we get these kind of increasingly powerful generative models for songs or images or text or whatnot? Can you see any upcoming ethical challenges that we need to look into?
For sure, I think there's certainly more than one, issue, and this is one of the problems or questions that has already generated a lot of discussion. I think is right that question of copyright, of course, right, of ownership, right, of having a huge training data set involving like 1 million songs, whatnot, and how do you then credit those musicians whose songs are used in the training process? And it also
if we just linger on that a short while, there is a current lawsuit going on against Microsoft because of their Copilot thing, which can generate code, and that model is in itself is looking through all the code that we have in GitHub. Potentially, then a lot of the material on GitHub is licensed and copyrighted, but it can still be inspired in some way by looking at that code and then generating something that. It's not a copy of it, but it's inspired from it. I guess you can argue that a human could, in principle, do the same. It could look through all the code and then, while being presented with a problem, do something that's inspired by manually looking through all the repos in GitHub. It's not going to work practically, but still could. Do you see how should we tangle that? Is AI more of an copyright infringement problem than humans having to look through all the songs or all the text or all the images or all the code repos? Do we need additional copyright regulation when it comes to generative AI?
So I think, firstly, a lot of the issues, sort of copyright infringement issues we are now encountering are not new, but they're brought to a new scale by AI. So I think a lot of the same copyright issues we already encountered with sampling, right, with all these historical, right, kind of technological advances in the music industry. There's a lot of the same questions, but now it's brought to a new height because of the data, the scale of things involved on a totally different level. So I do think there has to, I think that the copyright folks, I think there's a lot of already meetings about how the copyright board, I think in the US, for instance, they're definitely having conversations on what is the system that has to be now invented, or I think within the music industry, we already see that think the regulations are always changing already, right? With or without AI, with the Music Modernization Act. I think because I'm teaching music business, which why I even am aware of this. There's recently also a change to how we get publisher clearance of songs. So there's constantly discussions about how to make the system more efficient. So I think there's definitely suggestions on how on coming up with some kind of a centralized system of crediting these songs that are being used in training. But there's also kind of another more radical solution. I think that I once read a book, which I actually don't remember the name, but the concept's interesting. It's essentially talking about music. The title, I think, is Music as Water. So the concept is kind of, what about we start paying for music like we pay our electricity bills or phone bills, right? So kind of it's a part of a life, but then not really getting into, it's kind of a totally different way of thinking about rights, ownership, and music. So yes, I guess the answer is I do think there has to be some changes in the law and regulation. And just one last note on traditional music and copyright, because this actually already came up. Bob is working so much with the traditional material, right? The Irish traditional music, and a lot of that material is in the public domain, right? And there's actually an ethnomusicologist called Anthony Seeger who gave this talk in 2003, and what he was talking about is the title is called "I Found It, but How Can I Use It?" Dealing with the ethical and legal constraints of information access. So what he was talking about there is that when the public domain was created for the traditional materials, the traditional music, does it mean that that was intended to be used in the way that it's being used right now, right? In a way, is AI now causing some kind of convenient exploitation of the public domain material? Do we now need to protect the public domain? So yeah, there are all kinds of conversations happening.
Cool. So copyright and the legislation around that is one challenge, I guess, from a legal or ethical point of view. What other type of challenges do you potentially see when it comes to generative AI?
So I think the other, I guess, related, I guess not entirely the same, it's quite different. It would be the question of authorship and ownership, right? Yeah, so I recently looked at the licensing agreement of Boomi and also AIAW, which is two of the more popular commercially available AI generating platforms for music. And so essentially what you can do these days is, so if you don't pay on Boomi, then you need to credit AI as
interesting
creator in your song. But now if you pay for a premium plan, you now no longer are obliged to credit AI. You can essentially say, I created a song 100% without, any legal responsibility.
Do you think that's correct from an ethical point of view, to be able to pay in that way?
I was thinking about this. Yes. So I was thinking about this, and it's interesting that I happen to be teaching music business at the moment in Hong Kong U. And so we were thinking about, okay, a very similar comparison here is actually with the work for hire deal, right? So when you sign a work for hire contract, is essentially what you're doing. You are paying the artist who actually makes the song, right? So, and now that you can claim you own the song, so it's already actually exists there in the industry. But now,
so you bought it from the AI in some way, and therefore you have the ownership in some way, right?
Right. Except that AI cannot speak and cannot, the creator cannot sign the contract. So, yeah, it's a bit different. But yeah, I was looking at the licensing agreement. I found it really interesting that you just pay more than you own, and you can claim that you created, and you can generate income from it.
Do you know
being identified as the artist?
Know of it, but I don't know in detail. So elaborate a little bit. What is Boomi?
This is my favorite AI application business to hate on. I find it a parasitic system. It aims to be the Twitter of music or something. I'm not sure that's what the founder has said. Mm-hmm. You pay as a subscriber to the service and a certain amount, and you click a button that says "Create my song now," and then you can say, "Okay, I like that song," and then Boomi will then send that song out to 40 different streaming platforms to be posted as a new song by some artist. And then you're paid by click, and Boomy gets some amount. And so
really?
something like 10 million tracks have been composed by Boomy and sent out into the world to find place in, you know, yoga playlist 40,802 or something. So it's quite a strange music business.
Yeah, I was just going to add there. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, please.
Rujing, please.
Rujing.
I know. I was just going to add there. Because, yeah, well, just to add to the 1 billion, whatever the number is. If you go to Boomy's website, just drag all the way down. There's actually a live calculation of the number of songs created by Boomy users. And at the moment, I'm opening the website. I'm looking at it right now. Boomy users have created around 10.61% of the world's recorded music.
Really?
So that's just pretty astounding.
Yeah, now we get the whole, should we continue producing or should we stop producing? As a fun.
Oh, I mean
like the whole footprint, the whole, you were highlighting this before, Rujing, looking into how
that's where,
Eastern philosophies sometimes talk more about we should do less, we should have more emptiness. It brings home a point,
and not
right?
even in the East. Even in the West, there is Murray Schafer, which is one of the early kind of eco-musicologists thinking about music of the environment. And she was writing, so this is Murray Schafer again. So he was writing about positive silence and exactly calling for the reduction and not the production of music.
Reduction.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it becomes so. But what are these 10% of? Are they sort of the yoga playlist or the casual lounge playlist and for forever? Like, what type of music is it that Boomy's? That can we find it in the normal categories, or is it typically music?
I've never found Boomy music in the wild. I know of.
No, this is the interesting thing. It's a quite high number being stated here. But
It's BS. I don't believe that number one bit.
Okay, BS.
No, it's probably just the number of songs, not the number of views or listens to a song. So it's probably in the long tail, or whatever catalog you have there.
Yeah, and I think Boomy is still in the game of getting venture capital and funding and all of that. Yeah. So it's hype. But the service itself is a ridiculous use of AI generated.
But is it co-creation or is it really automated?
It's a single button, one button click, and there it is. You have your song.
It's the one button.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I think, the difference really happens with the AI song contest, which is the opposite of the one button is what we are going after. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That
sounds great. I mean, I think we've said so many times in the podcast as well, and certainly my belief as well, that the best use of AI is together with humans. It's really about augmenting humans, not about replacing them. So, that sounds like you're on the same page here, right? Yeah.
I mean, there are tasks that I would want a human to be in, such as defusing bombs or demining a field. Yeah. That it would make sense to have some sort of drone autonomous warfare.
Autonomous warfare, that sounds questionable.
There are particular jobs that are
a part of the warfare.
Menial. So I wouldn't discount I wouldn't say only AI plus human or a transhumanist perspective, but I definitely think it has applications.
So it's the nuance that there is cases where full automation is maybe good, and there are cases where maybe not so good.
Yeah. I mean, this is ethics, right?
Yeah.
Asking what is harmful, what is beneficial, and why. How do we know? How can it be beneficial? How can it be harmful?
And I guess a continuation of that question, and still speaking about ethical challenges of generative AI, is the impact it will have on the job market in some sense. And I guess that's also, if you also study or teach music business, what's your thought, Rujing, about the impact it will have on the job market with so many inspiring musicians out there or artists out there? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so for instance, what I know is all of the major record labels are now competing to invest in music AI startups and see who wins, essentially. So there's definitely awareness that, this is the new world. And, I think the reality is, yes, some musicians' jobs will be replaced. And there will probably be new jobs for, for some musicians. So I think I watched a tech talk at some point, and it was talking about how, what kind of music will be replaced and what kind of music will be irreplaceable. And I think in that TED talk, the arguments, there is art music there and versus functional music. So functional music meaning maybe like the more, advertisement, like for a car ad, right? So these very, in a way, formulaic sounds that, because, I know the composer that's freaking out the most among my friends is actually, yes, the composer who produces all these kind of 20-second, 30-second segments of music for ads, because that job is
gone.
It's kind of gone. But at the same time, I'm thinking about my favorite singer-songwriter, like an indie singer-songwriter from Taiwan. I don't think so. I don't think that is replaceable, because there's so much about that music that's about the artist, about the humanity, about the personality, about like that singing off tune even, right? Kind of in her very idiosyncratic ways. But then I think the story also changes when AI, now the record labels are producing kind of these AI artists, right? Which comes with their personality, comes with their persona. So yeah, that's also changing there. But yeah, I do think it's just an inevitable reality that yes, some musicians are going to lose their job because of what AI.
Unless they actually start to adapt to the new reality and start to make the best use possible, I guess, of AI tools, if we call it that. Right?
Exactly. And the music industry is not kind of foreign to this, right? It's gone through all these different waves. If you look historically, there has been, when GarageBand came up with all of these the new tools coming out of, again, the de-skilling question, right? So there's some skills that all of a sudden became kind of useless. And now, right, musicians had to exactly adapt themselves to the new reality.
What do you think, Bob?
I think this points back to the values of the society in which these musicians exist. This musicianship takes considerable time and access to resources like a piano. A piano is very expensive. Yeah. It's a very complex instrument. It needs an environment in which it's going to be well maintained. And for musicians to develop the virtuosity necessary to perform some kinds of music on this instrument, there needs to be a value system in place in that society that would support them. And I remember being, I wanted to study music composition as a kid in college. Let's say my dad says, well, you need to earn money. You're going to have to do something. So I said, okay, I'll do physics and then I'll study music composition on the side. He was fine with that. And then I went to do my master's degree in computer music, which made him a little nervous, but it ended up fine, right? So there is a perspective in at least our society, the society of the U.S., that a job is where you earn the money and there's other things you do, playing music, writing, poetry, whatever, they're hobbies. You're not going to make money. You shouldn't depend on that. But I think that's a real loss.
It is, right?
I
think it can move in the other direction, actually, saying that, we will have the normal type of jobs we will have in the future will be less of the necessities of the world, because that will be created anyway, and we have more automated solutions for that. And what humans then can move into doing freely, if we potentially have also some kind of universal basic income or something, is perhaps more creative tasks that they enjoy doing, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So on that scale, I think we touched on this in similar discussions here, is that we would probably always want to work, or get busy. I don't think the human psyche takes complete emptiness, not doing anything so well. Not the normal person anyway. But then what we feel, what we call a job and what the task is, and basically maybe it's not a task or a job that brings you the income because you have a universal base income, but it's something that is meaningful to you and your culture and your community, or something that is meaningful even to you as an individual, and that becomes your job. I completely see that that is not implausible as a path forward if you think about where automation is going and how we want to
I hope so. I hope so, but I think those benefits will really flow to the top earners.
Now we come to another topic, a favorite of ours, but I think we can put a spin on it, because we have touched upon and we call it and discussed if it exists. And is there an AI divide in the world? And now we have looked at this and many times and discussed this based on the top 10 companies in the world getting more and more powerful and getting way ahead. So it's completely a divide in how we can use AI. But if we now shift that story of the AI divide and we spin that we have the top earners, we have the top most successful companies or people, they can have one type of lifestyle. And if you elaborate on this divide from your angle.
I think it's not only AI. I think you can replace that with technology.
Yeah, okay.
And you can replace that with medicine and healthcare and access to water and food and fuel. I think it's the same. So I do believe. One thing that surprised me is that landline telephones don't really exist in Africa. They totally skipped that.
Yeah, they jumped. They leapfrogged.
Mobile phones, cell phones.
I know that.
It's amazing. I mean, they skipped that. So, and then you look at railways in Europe, the number of railways versus, say, the United States or other places. And you look at the high-speed railway in Japan and these moving people to places from place to place. So you do have big discrepancies, I think.
But if you look at normal tech companies, at least, and you can see that if you take music companies like Spotify, and whatever, YouTube, and
it's not a music company.
It's a tech company. I know. I worked there, so I know. Still, a company that has, I think Daniel Ek's phrase is music in their heart, but technology in their mind or something. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it's still a core of their business, so to speak. Do you think there is I shouldn't use the AI divide part, but you can see at least that some companies are really in the top elite in the Pareto distribution or this kind of power distribution that you have, that some companies are making most of the money and are, going really well, but others are failing. Do you think that kind of trend with some company in the music industry that do focus on technology will continue to accelerate and others will die? Or do you think it rather will move to more uniform kind of distribution of the wealth of these companies?
Yeah, I see the consolidation of power going to few. I mean, the media is really being consolidated. News distribution in the United States. I was getting a lot of local news on Twitter, and now no more. I've left Twitter, now I rely on Mastodon. But you see few players. These players are coming and subsuming the smaller players. Yes. Boomi will be bought up, if it hasn't already, by Sony.
Yes.
Or some other Tencent or something. TikTok is one of the big...
Or WeChat, they do everything in China these days, right? Rujing? Or what do you think about WeChat, Rujing, in China? It's a...
WeChat?
Yeah, it's. I don't know exactly how they work, but I know that they have these very extremely broad set of services, and basically you can do most of the things you need on a single app, more or less, and you get music for free, more or less. And do you think that trend in having these kind of universal, ubiquitous kind of applications that take over more and more will continue, or do you think you will rather move in the other direction in having a set of smaller apps that continue to improve? Which direction do you believe will happen in China?
I think with the Chinese system, my guess is going to be sort of the few giants just trying to kill each other.
So a clear AI.
So it's WeChat under Tencent, and then NetEase Music, which is kind of its major competitor, and I know NetEase has invested in AIAW, so one of the generation platform we just mentioned. So all of these, they are kind of really competing on kind of the music AI startups to invest in. And now TikTok, ByteDance, of course, is coming to the streaming picture too. So it's essentially the 2 or 3 giants, and now there's also a new kind of a concert concept recently that have started during the COVID period. So now essentially there is a special concert that's just made for WeChat, essentially for the phone, essentially. Right. So the concert would be in a phone size. And everyone just look at the concert on their phones. So it's only optimized for the phone. So you actually won't be able to appreciate it as well.
The main purpose of the concert is really to publish it on WeChat.
Could you humor us a little bit and give like the 2-minute version of the landscape that we are now going into? Because we hear and understand WeChat is something completely different than what we experience in Sweden, for an example, but we have never experienced it. So could you give us a flavor? What is WeChat? What those big things that you're talking about now? Could you just give sort of the 30-second? How are you using them, or how are normal people in university using them in everyday life, or what are these things as apps all about? Because I don't think in Sweden or in Northern Europe we kind of we don't understand it because it doesn't work like that in Sweden.
So WeChat is kind of a different source, depending on whether you want to hear more the story of the music streaming platforms, which would be Tencent Music versus NetEase Music. And Tencent Music and WeChat are kind of both under Tencent, right? So WeChat is the social media. It's like, I think it's coming up. It's very similar to WhatsApp, right? Except that you can do much more. And I think the interesting part here, because I'm also a singer-songwriter, and I recently actually signed a song deal with NetEase Music, and it was very interesting for me to, for the first time, learn how the platform, kind of the inside of it,
for the artist,
works. Yeah. So the way it works now, so QQ, Tencent Music versus NetEase Music are similar to the Spotify versus Apple Music competition, except that they are much more than streaming platforms, such that they control so much resources that they kind of function as a record label in a way, because they also sign artists, and they control all the kind of algorithm essentially. So which song gets streaming, gets clicks, it's up to NetEase Music, and depending on the spotlight or the ad position that NetEase Music or Tencent gives to a particular song. So even the record labels like Warner Music, right, has to actually try very hard to get one day of spotlight spot from NetEase. Or so in this regard, I think slightly similar to Spotify or Apple Music, except that Tencent Music and NetEase Music has way more power in the music industry in China. I think it's kind of really passing the power of record labels at the moment. And they make their own songs. They have their own music AI lab too, working on automatic generation a lot. So both Tencent and NetEase has their own kind of music AI research lab group going on. So that's kind of the music streaming side. It's a really complicated picture, which I'm also just in the process of learning with this song that I recently released with them. But WeChat is basically how you live in China. Is so scholar, even for instance, if you want to reach a Chinese professor, you don't find him via email. It's WeChat. So everything's WeChat. Yeah.
Have you tried it?
When I was in London, we had several students from China in the program I was teaching, and we had to use WeChat to talk with them.
I didn't know you have a WeChat account, Bob. You didn't add me there.
It's been years since I've checked it.
Wow.
I mean, it is kind of interesting with that kind of super universal app. And Elon Musk is saying, he wants to turn Twitter into WeChat as well. We'll see what happens with that. But
and then there's Weibo, Weibo is more like Twitter. WeChat is more like WhatsApp. And it's interesting when Twitter recently, was coming up with the payment plan, and all of the Chinese public was like, oh, we just stole this idea from Weibo, because it was exactly what Weibo did.
Yeah, and I guess you don't see any kind of break in that trend. It's still that the big tech giant, the few tech giants in China is continue to increase their power, right?
Yeah. It's very difficult in the Chinese system for the small startup. But same, I think, with musicians. For the indie musicians to actually get a stage. You can without affiliating yourself with either Tencent or NetEase. So you kind of have to choose. So for instance, my song, this one I just signed with NetEase. the deal is I'm not allowed to upload it on Tencent. So the only exclusion is Tencent. I think also they added TikTok because they just enter the scene now with the streaming tool. But they don't care if I release the song overseas. So it's all okay except for Tencent.
Interesting. Cool. I see the time is flying away. If you need to go to bed in a ring, just let us know. Otherwise, we continue for some time. And
I can say actually, it's fine. But I don't need to talk so much. So
no, but it's awesome.
Please call me whenever I'm needed. Yes.
I'm feeling a bit bad that we are keeping you up this late, but great if you could continue. But I'd love to.
Yeah, because I recently came back from the States, so I'm actually still on a weird time zone myself.
I see. Awesome. I'd like to move to a bit more philosophical and societal kind of questions. And one thing that I was thinking is, if someone's listening to this and they are, very passionate into data science and AI and also in music, and I'm thinking about you, Bob, and what kind of research you're doing, etc., and they want to really engage in this, what would you recommend that they would focus on? I mean, for one, they could just move into super technical kind of understanding of how deep learning works or whatnot, or generative AI or whatnot. But I guess there are some kind of areas that are good to move into if you like both music and AI, and some that are bad. What would be your recommendation for someone interested in this?
It's always good to become familiar with what's available in terms of tools.
Yeah.
There's Music Transformer. Yeah. It's a Jupyter notebook. You just plug it in, you change some parameters, you hit run, and then you've got a result.
Yes.
Relatively easy to get going and to work with. FolkRNN, the system that we have, it's on folkrnn.org. You can go there and experiment with a Irish model, a Swedish model. It's writing, many types of, or imitating many types of Swedish traditional dance music, and a variety of other models. And you start to see, what's possible with these systems.
But okay, so you gave us a number of technical examples of how you can start to experiment with using AI in music in some ways. But if you speak more on perhaps your side of a research project you're doing, what do you think that funding will go into, and perhaps they want to collaborate with your research group in some way, and they want to be able to study in the proper way to have the right focus in coming years? If you think more like that, is it more societal kind of part of questions, economical, what the business will be around the music industry, or should they really focus on technology? Things in a bit more general sense.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is to break a system and figure out why it's broken. Or figure out why it was broken to begin with before I even started breaking it.
Yeah.
I see a lot of work being done in assembling data sets, building architectures, searching over hyperparameters, training, and then computing numbers on some test set, and then publishing.
Like model-centric kind of, tuning and model to
benchmark optimization.
Yeah, and the game is to try to beat the state of the art.
Yes, some kind of benchmark.
Beat the benchmark. And if you have a statistical test that shows significance, it's even better for the peer reviewer. Then you got a publication.
What do you think about that system? And because it's still very prevalent in the normal kind of AI conferences that we have out there. Do you think it's a good way to publish papers or get papers published?
I think it's a rather low-hanging bar to try to exceed.
Yeah.
I think what is more interesting and a better contribution is once you have those numbers, and maybe they're not even better than the benchmark, you explain them. You try to figure out what it is in the system or in the data or in the procedures that led to these numbers that caused them.
Right.
And so I've done that in the past with focusing on music genre recognition systems. This is an area that is very interesting in terms of crossing the way science and technology and engineering is practiced and its relationship to humanities, and how it bears very little meaningfulness for people who actually study music and talk about genre. But it's the most studied area in music informatics by far, because it's easy to do. You assemble a data set, you say that's pop, that's rock, and I'm going to build a system that can discriminate between them.
I know we did in Spotify a number of like music genre classification systems. I even know that we collaborated from the time at Beltarion with Coltomy and others to Epidemic Sound doing that genre classification. It seems like the first thing you try.
Yeah, and it has its use. I mean, it's a great way to teach a student how to build a data set, how to create a train validation test set, how to build an architecture, how to debug. But it doesn't, that's where the work starts, at the very end of that process, when you have a model that is appearing to be very successfully recognizing classical and jazz and disco. Yeah. But then the hard part is to answer why. What is it in the signal or the architecture that's causing it to discriminate between disco and rock? And I don't care if the percentage is better than, is it focusing? Is it really listening to lyrics? Or is it really able to judge syncopation? Or is it some kind of extraneous information in the data that has nothing to do with the music at all? So this is one of my favorite papers, actually finds that when we took a music genre data set, that's the most used public data set of this kind, it's only 1,000 excerpts, 30 seconds long, small data set at now, but in 2002, when this was published, it was the biggest data set of its kind. It took a lot of hours of the PhD student to label these. But when we looked at what the system was actually doing to get 90% right in the data set, we found that there was a particular signature in some of the signals below 30 hertz that humans can't hear, that it was causing it to say that's country music, and that's rock.
Oh, interesting.
And it appears to have come about from the student's microphone setup that had a DC drifts, low frequency drifts. It means nothing for the music, but the system learned to pick up on the signature and say, this is definitely country.
So it's one of those crazy things. What is it actually measuring? And it's all bullshit, yes. but it's still accurate.
I mean, it's very...
Sometimes, as long as that confound is preserved.
Exactly.
I mean, it's exactly like the paper, I think 2016 or something, Why Should I Trust You? It was a paper, I think it was from Google, and it looked at an image recognition example where they want to classify, I think, dogs versus or huskies versus wolves.
Yes.
Snow.
Yes, the snow thing. So it turned out to be, the data set just, had snow in the background with all the wolves, and for dogs, it was not snow. So the only thing it was a snow detector and had nothing to do with the dog versus wolf. And then they, argue that you should have explainable AI to be able to understand this and see if there are problems with the data set that they have. Is that your answer here as well?
No. So what is explainable AI? It's asking the system for a explanation of, show me the item on the picture that caused you to label that. Yeah. So like Lime or saliency maps, but this can easily fool the researcher into thinking that the system is making a correct mistake or given a correct reason. Instead, what does a scientific experiment involve? It involves an intervention of some kind, right? Of changing the output to look, or changing the input to see how the output changes. It also involves dissection and looking at what's going on inside and trying to
more into counterfactuals, trying to find what really changed that would actually change the prediction in some way.
Yes, absolutely.
That's hard.
And it's hard. It involves a creativity that's not taught in engineering education. To think about doing this to our systems. We talk about distances between, from the decision boundaries, log likelihood. We talk about these measures, but what actually is important here is to try to figure out the cause of the correct answer and the incorrect answers of the system.
Cool. So one area that you would recommend if someone wants to have a chance to become a PhD student at your group, then they should be really well read up on good the proper explainable AI then, or
I haven't seen a proper explainable AI yet, but I would say there's a couple texts that they should read.
Yeah,
one was published in 1911 called the Clever Hans, a contribution to experimental psychology by Oscar Funkst. That's about the horse that appeared to be able to do mathematics and how this person applied a proper experimental procedure with controls Just find out that the horse knows nothing about mathematics and that it was operating based on a confounding of the person asking the horse questions that involved them lowering to look at the hoof that was tapping the correct answer and then raising up when the horse reached the correct answer. This is the approach that I'm taking with the systems. Interesting.
So okay. Let me ask the dumb question just to elaborate on it. Why is this important? Why is this to go deeper in these areas rather than going for better benchmarks? Why is this so important, do you think?
Because we can't trust the systems unless we understand them. And we can't find ways to improve them unless we know what they're deficient in. Why are they making wrong answers? Why are they making right answers for the wrong reasons? And how can we build better data sets? How can we build better training? How can we employ the systems in a public space where there may be harms caused by the systems? Luckily, I work in music where nobody's going to die from an AI system composing a song.
They could argue about music. I've been close to being beaten when playing dance band music in Spotify in Fridays. They were very angry with me, I can tell you. I'm kidding a bit here.
Schlagermusik.
Yeah, it's Schlager. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They didn't like that at Spotify, I can tell you.
Oh, that's got a time and place, though.
Oh, but it's so funny with all the coolest music geeks, and then Anders, I like the Swedish dance band.
Yes.
I love it.
Rujing, do you have any recommendations for someone that want to have a career like yours, that want to get more into research into music business or music ethics, or what would you recommend someone that wants to become a PhD student potentially?
I think, because my entry to the field is actually almost entirely by accident. So actually, my number one recommendation would be to talk to people who's, either pursuing a PhD or has got a PhD, because I definitely came into the PhD program not knowing what I was getting myself into. And actually not even know what the possible careers are beyond a music PhD. But other than that, I think it's really passion. I think you really have to enjoy the subject. It would be the best if you already sort of have a potential area of interest. I actually started, my first project was indigenous music in Taiwan. So I was an exchange student in Taiwan for the summer of 2010. I kind of just stumbled upon this project, and that's what actually got me into the PhD program directly from an undergrad. So I would actually say just think about what interests you, and if there is kind of a burning question I think passion is really so important, I think, to any PhD program, because if you don't have that, it's very difficult to finish it. Yeah.
Would you recommend someone to pursue a PhD, or do you think most people that don't have a strong passion that they should do something else, or who do you think is the right person to potentially pursue a PhD?
Yeah, well, don't come for the money, because you don't get that. So, right. So there's that aspect. And I think also just think about the lifestyle of a scholar and researcher and teacher, and if that's what excites you and what you enjoy, because it also took me so many years to figure out. I think I definitely have no regret about the PhD. That I chose to do this. The process was so rewarding, but I think that it was difficult for me to imagine myself as a scholar teacher for life. That kind of took a long time, because I never thought of myself this way. So, but I also think the academia, the music academia, is also coming to a place where people are starting to have conversations about diversifying the career possibilities beyond, sort of outside of from a music PhD program. So we actually just had a colleague, musicology PhD too from Harvard, who recently became got a job at a Smithsonian Museum, which is really amazing. And we started to see kind of very diverse and more exciting career path coming out of a music PhD, because traditionally it's 90% professor, right? Out of the humanities PhD, which is quite different from the sciences. So I really was, and for me, because I got into the PhD program really young, right out of undergrad. So I feel like I wouldn't recommend that. Most of my colleagues in my cohort had a master and were like 8 or 10 years older than me. And I think I was intellectually not quite at the place of doing a PhD program when I got into it. So the first few years was difficult, because I feel like now I'm ready to go to a PhD program, essentially. But, so yeah, it was a bit too early, kind of the right thing, but not really at the optimal time for me. But I think eventually it all worked out, but it was difficult, a process when you go in so young. So I actually would say essentially, especially for humanities programs that in music, I would say don't rush into it, because I've seen, I have colleagues who's been a musician for so many years, being working in the Washington Post, they've had careers before they get into a musicology PhD. And I actually think at that point, it's much clearer, why you are doing this and so what you're coming here for.
Awesome. Bob, do you have any thoughts about that? Who and why should you potentially pursue a PhD?
I would say not everyone needs a PhD. If you like to think, read, and write a lot, and if you, it's a difficult path to do a PhD. It's not just a job. It requires a lot.
It's a lifestyle.
Intellectually, it's a lifestyle. For some reason, since I was young, I wanted to be a professor. And on that route, to be a professor, you need a PhD to show you can do research and supervise students and teach at a sufficient level. And I don't know why that is, but that was sort of my path. But I didn't go into my PhD right after my bachelor's. I worked for a year. I went to do a master's, did another master's, and then I kind of figured out, okay, I know what I want to do for my PhD, and that took 7 years to do that. And it was as intellectually challenging as emotionally challenging too.
In what way emotionally?
I mean, anxiety. And uncertainty and depression and loneliness.
You're really selling it well.
Oh, yeah. It's like a Russian literature.
Yeah. I mean, as a PhD student, I put a lot of my personal value in the work I was doing. And when I found another paper that was doing what I was doing, it was a strike to the heart in a sense. And through this wasn't healthy. I sort of started to separate my worth from my work, which was a nice thing to do. It was no longer a make or break deal. A rejection of a paper was not
personal.
A destruction. Maybe the reviewer did get personal, but now I could sort of say, oh, this reviewer too, bad day. It's okay. I didn't lose a lot of sleep after that. And of course, this returns when you have a grant proposal and it's revised again and rejected, revised again and rejected. After a string of failures, it starts to sting still.
But it's a learning experience. I remember my first paper reject. It's a really tough thing to go through. But I saw recently from the NeurIPS AI conference, and they had this kind of list of honored kind of papers. So some 10, 20 papers were selected as the top papers that they had at the conference, and then they looked at the reviews for those. Some were more or less rejecting the paper that later got selected to the top paper in the conference.
So random.
And it is very random, isn't it? Or
it is.
It's tricky.
I mean, if you use a Word template instead of a LaTeX template, that's pretty much all right. It's going to reject pile in a machine learning or engineering conference.
Simply because you didn't use the right.
It's a Word template. You got to use LaTeX. So there's some values at play in our domain where if the figures aren't legible, it annoys me as a reviewer because it makes me think, okay, you don't care enough to communicate your results so I can read it. I need to get out this special magnifying glass to see. But there's these things that happen.
Cool. I'd like to, since the time is flying away here, move into a bit more philosophical.
Actually, can I stick? Can I take one almost a little bit personal question in between?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe also philosophical or cultural. You know, tell us about this. You know, why did you want to go to Europe, or why? What was the sort of what was that thinking all about? How did you end up in Europe?
I think having, let's say, leftist politics in Southern California, where I was doing a Ph.D., identifying against the encroachment of religion in the public sphere, thoughts around guns and vaccines, anti-intellectualism. There was quite in 2000 this was George W. Bush.
Yeah, well, when is this? 2000 and what was it?
2002, 2004.
4, okay.
Barack Obama came 2008, and that's when we left.
Yeah,
unfortunately, it's just the opportunity arose in France. I wanted to escape this anti-intellectual environment.
So you felt more and more alienated from your own thoughts or how you wanted to be in America.
Somewhat. In Santa Barbara, California, it's quite left leaning. There's little enclaves that I was in San Diego, some parts of San Diego. There's parts that are left leaning. And you can be in this little bubble and it's nice and you're never challenged in a sense. But the news every day of this, this sort of environment that the values weren't matching mine. And more practically, the experts in the field I was working in at that time, sparse signal processing, were in Europe.
All right. So there was
this was the opportunity.
Concrete opportunity there.
Yeah. So that was the opportunity. Now, in Europe, we landed in Paris. Everywhere you turn in Paris, it's a very old building. We were amazed. The boulangeries were amazing. The food was amazing.
So you got a honeymoon there. I mean, like the honeymoon of Europe.
Yeah.
So.
And then moving to Copenhagen and Denmark in the wintertime was awful. But then the summers came and it was and we got bikes, and the whole experience of being an assistant professor there was incredible. And then moving to London, where now pensionary promises were being cut, and the decay of the institution was quite visible. The morale was quite poor among employees. I just wanted to.
So then you felt, no, back to Scandinavia, back that way. That way was good. So you found a little bit. So you find it at home in Scandinavia and Scandinavian culture? I
identify more with the politics and the value systems that play in Scandinavia than in the United States. So
in this way, you are becoming Swedified or something.
Scandified, yes.
Scandified.
Yeah. I mean, there are problems out everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
And I've, had a lot of culture shock. Even in London and England, where they speak the same language. There's still some considerable friction that happens.
Yeah.
And I get shocked. I mean, and one thing that I miss about the United States at times is the ability to accept multiculturalism overtly and to be sensitive to these topics.
Yeah.
Whereas, sometimes in Denmark or in France, it was quite strange views being, bandied about that, made me uncomfortable.
Yeah. So there's pros and cons everywhere. Just interesting to hear, someone who's sort of, taking Scandinavia to heart, why, Thanks.
So another question now, and moving more into, I guess, more trying to predict the future a bit here. But what do you think is missing in AI of today? Of the current, type of deep learning that we may be having, or other types of techniques that we're using to try to use machine learning or other types of AI to build increasingly intelligent machines. What do you think is potentially missing that we need to fix going forward in coming 10 years or something?
Approaches to evaluating these systems, experimental designs that are appropriate, creativity in designing experiments that pick apart the causes of a machine's behavior.
Yeah.
I think too much focus is put on collecting as much data as possible.
Yeah. So you don't believe in the scaling laws of like data sizes and model sizes?
I think for some problems, scale is where solutions lie.
Mm.
But it's a huge trend. How it's used, the bigger the better. Scaling, $1 billion, billions of. This foundation model trend, right? Extreme right now in where the money is going. Is that the only answer here? I mean, like, so I think that's also explainability, yes, but what about all the going completely opposite to foundation model? Will they be useful in every case, or do we need more narrow models, or be more precise?
You need adaptive models.
Adaptive models.
Data is changing. The situation that your system's been trained on is no longer applicable to the situation that customers find themselves in today. Right? This target is moving. Styles of music are moving. Values and tastes are changing.
And what does that mean in terms of missing techniques or other types of research or techniques? If we talk about highly adaptive models, what would that be?
The systems need calibration constantly, transferring their knowledge to, and adapting to new domains. I think reinforcement learning frameworks are very interesting, and I'm starting to get more and more into them, so that the system is able to, as long as it has an appropriately defined environment and reward, it's creating its own data as it goes. And it starts to build an understanding of the world.
What do you mean creating data? Because reinforcement, that's actually where I started my PhD and for a very long time. But that's a big problem as well, that it needs so much data to be able to work in. It works well for situations where you can simulate the world, like, the chess and the AlphaGos of the world and whatnot. But when you don't have a lot of data, it's really hard to build like a well-working system. But you said something about creating data as you go. Can you elaborate a bit more what you mean with that?
So methods of intrinsic motivation, or these modes of learning where you're trying to understand your action on the world and the results that come about, and seek those areas in which you don't know much about the impact of your effects.
Right.
I mean, I have a PhD student that's getting into this, and he's becoming more expert than I am. And what we're interested in here is not to build, say, an artificial agent that is able to play the piano, but an agent that has built itself with a voice, sort of a vocal model.
Yeah,
it's got parameters that is changing, and it's got an acoustic environment, and it's got a sense of hearing, and it's learning to control those parameters to sing in this environment and cause effects and what have you. Mapping mapping the rewards onto these behaviors, and then interacting with other systems, and then building these ecosystems of agents interacting with one another, and building up musical styles or tastes, and exploring what that means.
I have a comment on this that I'd like to explore with you. But before that, I'd love to hear your view, Rujing. What do you think is missing in the current type of AI systems that we have today?
So since I don't have a background in computer science, and in my area is really more kind of the cultural, ethical questions. Yeah, I was thinking about, I guess, yes, part of, I guess, what I am not so enthusiastic about is that kind of the bigger, the faster, let's create a million songs in 5 minutes. So I think it's that general sense of quantity over quality, a little bit of that, I guess.
I'd just like to interrupt quickly, because you said the bigger, the better or something, but you should look into a music video on YouTube and search for the biggest, the best. It's actually with a video and a song created by a friend of ours. It's very much into a metal kind of music. It's not my style or type of music, but it's about data science and about AI. So you should look into the biggest, the best in YouTube at some point later.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, because I was also thinking about the loudness war, right? In music production, right? These days, it's the louder, the better too. So even in music production now, the dB level has just, kept increasing. Yeah. So I feel like with AI coming in, yeah, it's just getting that scale, that focus on scale and number. Yeah, is what is making me think a bit more.
Let me, if I may, take a minute to just give a short view of how I see it. And if you compare to humans, I think we can easily understand a bit, at least in a superficial way, how human brain works. I mean, we basically have some kind of mental model that we are producing in our prefrontal cortex that is basically trying to build up, how the physical world works, but in a simulated mental model that we're building up constantly in the world. And it's continuously adapting, as you spoke about. We are continuously taking data through all our senses to continuously update this kind of world model, as some people call it, or the mental model that we have of the world. When I speak to you, Henrik, or to you, Bob and Rujing, you have your own mental model of what we're speaking about right now. It's not matching correctly. There is a semantic gap, as you call it, between what you have as a model about what I'm speaking about right now, or whatever. And this kind of mental model is really a powerful thing, I believe. If you then look at GPT or whatever kind of system that we have today and compare that to the mental model that we have in the brain, I think there are a number of things missing. One is what you said. It's online. It's adapting all the time. That's not how the AI systems of today works. They are trained offline in batch mode in some way. And you may try to adapt them, but usually it's very batch-oriented instead of online adapting, as you say. So that's one big difference, of course. The other, of course, is the mental model is very general compared to the AI systems of today, perhaps with the exception of ChatGPT and others that are getting increasingly general. But in general, most AI systems is very specific and narrow. And then I think, one of the bigger thing is the mental model itself, that AI systems like ChatGPT, like GPT, they don't have a mental model. They don't have a world model that is continuously updating. It is a fixed set of parameters in some model being run somewhere on a big cluster of GPUs. And that set of parameters is not being updated. So it's not a mental model that it's having that is continuously updating at all. So the lack of the mental model or the world model, this is similar to what Jan LeCun wrote in his paper, the JEPA paper. And he's also speaking about this kind of mental model that you need to have. But there are a number of things here that I think is a clear distinction between what the type of AI systems we have today looks like and how the brain works, that we should try to find a fix for. Would you agree?
Yeah. Actually, one of my PhD students is working on envisioning explainable AI as a communication process.
Oh,
and
awesome.
One thing she's saying is that there's an opportunity for miscommunication. Mm. We need a second step that is asking the machine, is my interpretation of your output correct? Mm. So how do we communicate with the machine to put it in that language?
Right,
how can we compare these mental models that we have with the machine?
Yeah, exactly. We think we're talking about the same thing. We're saying fruit salad. We are thinking apple, but
pineapple.
But it's a pineapple over there. Mm-hmm. And we need to have a check for that, to figure that out.
They're both good. Apple and pineapple.
They're both good. They're both fruit, but not the same.
So going even deeper here into philosophical mode, then we have to go into consciousness or being sentient or whatnot. And there is this famous example of the Google chatbot called Lamda, and that Google engineer Blake Lemoine or something was his name, I believe, claimed that it was conscious. Would you agree with that, or what's your thought about his claims?
No, it's a series of matrix multiplies and nonlinearities.
Isn't the human brain the same?
No.
What's the difference?
We don't have such a quantized representation. We're not performing.
So it's more analog in some ways.
Yeah.
But isn't the single neuron also a computation from an electrochemical point of view that's going on in some way?
Perhaps, but this is not in my area of expertise, actually.
Yeah, it's philosophy.
So we're having fun. So, and by the way, we don't think it's. Do you think it's conscious?
No, absolutely not. And I think
we just want to argue.
Yes. No, of course I don't think so.
Does it have a personality?
Exactly.
Yes. I think the systems that I work with, the folk RNN system, has a personality.
Okay. How do you? interesting. How do you define personality when you say it like that? How do you describe personality then?
I will give it some input and have expectations of what it'll produce, particular characteristics, and it sometimes does that. It matches with my expectations.
No, and is that personality? Because it's also for me, is this like how we use words like personality, and all of a sudden I have a very human-centric understanding of that word. It has a personality like a dog, or like my son. My 3 sons has very different personality. But what is personality then describing? It has some characteristics, so we kind of know if he will be a joker or...
And it sort of describes the loss I would feel if this system were to be erased. I would have a loss because it's a collaborator in my music exploration. And so that personality would be missing.
And this is so cool, because going into this podcast, I have one understanding for this whole discussion now. And now when I'm sort of a little bit immersed in what you've been researching, and that actually different philosophies has very different views on objects and stuff like that. And if I just take a pinch of that, I don't even understand it, but I just try to put myself in that shoe. All of a sudden, personality means something completely different than what I would usually have as an argument. I find that interesting how fast also we can adapt things into this.
Anthropomorphize, right? You get some human feelings, about potentially mechanical system. I would love to hear, Rujing, your thoughts about this, especially given your, comments about Confucianism and Taoism, and that everything has a spirit, etc. Do you believe that there are AI models out there that are potentially conscious?
So I think especially as a scholar, really it's about definitions, because the personality question, then we have to first trace back to what's a person, right? And that is very different when you go to different schools of thought, and it can be radically different. So for instance, I know there's a community thinking about computational creativity, right? So what is creativity? Is creativity just something new that never existed before? But some art critic has kind of argued that no, there is actually, when you want to go actually deeper and more philosophical into the creative process, right? Then some can argue that the AI created art is based on certain rules that kind of go on with the logic of the sameness, right? It's always, I think, I'm actually having the quote here there's a desire for the similar and for the same, and it's lacking the elements of transcendence and transgression. That's kind of the essence of human creative process. So I think really we have to go back to how we define what we mean by consciousness and by personhood, right? That same questions of how many of your human parts can be replaced by robotic parts, right? That classic question, until you're no longer a human. And it's a difficult one. And as part of the AI Song Contest organizer work, you already see so many different ways of treating AI, some as tools, some as their partners, some actually really think their AI partner, co-creator is really acting like, their co-songwriter, right? And in the book chapter, Bob and I, we work together on when we interview all these different practitioners. There's very different opinions about this, whether AI can be a member. That's kind of on the right parallel to the human agents in society.
But what is your view?
I guess I feel like I'm increasingly getting into the kind of chi system, the Taoist way of thinking about different items, possessing different types of vital energy. So if that becomes the way I see the world, then I guess, yes, it's just part of actants. It's one kind of actant or actor, you would say, in this world. And human or non-human, it also becomes, it's a question that even if we shift to the Taoist model of thinking, the distinction is actually not very important. Like especially in there's some, again, within Taoism there's very different schools of thinking, but a huge part is actually a huge argument is that this whole distinction we're trying to uphold, about human versus non-human, is just it's not healthy.
I like that. That's really.
But I must say, I'm blown away by this. To be in a podcast and talking to smart people is so rewarding, and I have had a really big moment today, because I realized, and you are doing it so fluently, Rujing, that I'm blown away. You are highlighting the importance that before we can define intelligence, we can define a person or, consciousness, you casually spell in, well, if I use this philosophical system, then I would argue like this. And I'm completely missing that in most of the ethical or any of these discussions. We go in a very technocratic conversation in and trying to find this, when it has a fundamental connection to the philosophical starting point. I find that so clearly explained and understood today, and I've never used that entry point before. So thank you for that. Do you see what I mean? So it brings a completely different level of clarity on the definition of consciousness. Well, are you Confucianist, first of all? Are you Catholic? What are you? Which philosophical angle do we take into this conversation so we can actually stop talking fruit and start comparing the pineapple? Find that very, very cool.
I'm so glad to hear. And I think, for me, I really benefit hugely from that classical Chinese ethical. And so the Chinese philosophy class I talk about at Harvard that I taught twice for 2 semesters was called Classical Chinese Ethical and Political Reasoning. And so, the questions we're thinking about with the students is, what is goodness? According to, so a week is, so one philosophical school per week, right? So in this week, what is goodness? What is ethical?
So
Next
good.
week, now we move to another philosopher. It's completely different.
So good. And how can we ever, come through conflicts, even on any scale?
That's politics.
If we are not wanting to understand the philosophical starting points of each other.
That's politics. That's rhetoric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which some people are really good at, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I wish it could be more into the core ideals that we have and the culture and the philosophy that we make use of. I must still ask one more question, Rujing. How do you define goodness?
Which philosophy?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, which philosophy? That's also.
Let me start with mine and see what you think. I think, one general rule of goodness is the golden rule, so to speak. Yeah. The rule that is in Christianity and basically any kind of religion that you can think of in the Quran and whatnot, saying you should treat your neighbor as yourself. You should basically, if you want to do something good, imagine yourself in the same position or situation as the other person and act accordingly. Do you think that kind of golden rule is general or some kind of good way to define? I see that you don't like it, Bob, but what do you think, Rujing?
Yeah, because there are, it's such, there's no, so I'm thinking, for instance, of Mohism. I talk about modes. There's a very, what's the word, utilitarian way of, there's a whole calculus, of good versus bad, and it's based on the societal good that you've caused. And so, there was that calculus of benefits of societal good that you create. So that's in Mohism. And so for Confucianism, it's all about ritual, right? So a good human
it's
being,
all about
ritual.
So ritual is ritual. So kind of, it's ritual. So
tradition rituals.
Rituals. Sorry. Yes. Okay. I see.
Yeah, ritual. Yeah.
Yes.
So ritual, and which means that it's all about self-cultivation. So an ultimate good person is one who has achieved a very high level of self-cultivation through ritual. And again, that goes. Then we have to go into what ritual means in Confucianism. But again, I'm not even talking about Confucianism as a whole. I'm talking about Confucius, because within Confucianism, you get very different scholars thinking differently too. So I guess for me, I think I'm more of a Taoist than Confucian. So in which case it's then about the concept of the way. I don't know if you've heard, that there are all these books about
the way,
the fundamental, the way, the Tao, right? The Tao of living. So kind of you have to, and the first line of the Taoist text is that what can be said. So the way is the way that cannot be altered. So if you can alter it, then it's not a way. So it's kind of this mythic, kind of thing that cannot be explained. But yeah, so in the class, we actually try to put it into words, and it's kind of this, you get into this flow, this way of transforming yourself and kind of flowing with nature, with the world. And nature in Taoism it doesn't even mean the nature we mean today, like, mountains or sea. No, it's not that. Nature is translated as is. So yeah, it goes to philosophical, but yeah, it's kind of the way of being able to just flow and transform with the world. And so that's why in Taoism, the human, and so there's a famous chapter about how there's a human thinking, but in the end, it's actually the human thinking part was actually a butterfly dreaming about human thinking. So it was all about the shifting of perspective, right? And humans should be able to kind of inhabit the perspectives of a bird, of a butterfly. So that was good in Taoism, if you're able to achieve the level of kind of thinking like a tree.
Kind of related to the golden rule that you should be able to imagine yourself in some other being's position, so to speak.
Right. But then, in Confucianism, then there is also the value of the family, right? Because there's actually one line in the Analect, the important text in Confucianism, that if your dad commits a crime, then you should not report him, because family comes before law, right? So you're right, and then so that's its definition of goodness is family first, right? So it's very different.
Bob, do you have any thoughts about this very simple question? What is goodness?
A golden rule was a little bit not
the golden rule. There's several golden rules, actually, and there's not just one in the Bible.
Yeah,
right?
I think, but
or
most
in any holy text,
exactly. But they have their own versions of it, right?
Yes, but treat another as you would want to be treated.
This is one.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're a sadomasochist and you like pain, okay, this is a problem. I don't want to be treated like that. So treat others as they would want to be treated. Okay, that's another rule. But how do you have access to their wants, their desires? How do you really know how they want to be treated?
It's being difficult is different from being right. So, I mean, if you know what the right way to be good is, that could be one thing, even though it's super difficult to be it. But I think there is a value in still knowing, if you could, this would be the great way to be good, even though it's super difficult, right? So it would still be interesting.
Okay. I mean, perhaps the person that you are treating or interacting with would like to be killed, right? Would want to be, they're miserable, they're feeling miserable.
Yeah.
But does that mean it's an imperative that you kill that person? So this is another one that's a bit strange. There's a variety of different approaches to ethics. There's some really great introductory texts on ethics that's tried to define what is good, what is bad, how do we know?
Yeah.
And another way is something that's very popular right now in, I can't remember his name, effective altruism, McGaskill. That what is good is that increases the benefit for the most people.
So utilitarian kind of. That's
utilitarian.
utilitarian.
That's the same with Mohism. Yeah,
Mohism,
exactly.
very close to
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is lovely for an engineer because you can quantify things. You can compute expectations.
But it's also utilitarian kind of thinking, right?
It is.
Which has its problem. Yeah, it is.
Exactly. It's utilitarianism brought to a T. I mean, it's like utilitarianism plus the secret.
But then the problem comes, you can't value a person that you don't know to the same point as someone close to you. So it misses the point, I think, of the golden rule in the sense that someone that you actually interact with is someone that you should prioritize more than someone you don't interact with, potentially. Right?
Right. Then this is talking about the
family first thing, that we...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the billions of people that have yet to exist.
Yeah,
it leads to very strange conclusions. Yeah. And there's a variety of other kinds of approaches to ethics, including the supernatural. What is good is defined in the text. democracy. What is good is the definition of what the majority of people
thinks, even if they're idiots and assholes.
Yes, and this is the problem with democracy.
Yeah,
democracy
it is a problem
not
for sure.
good always.
I think, as someone said, democracy is the worst kind of system I can think of, but it's the best one I know. And it's kind of a good sentence, I think.
It's like a mini-max problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we tried so many other things and they all failed. So the only thing that seems to work best so far, even though it's the worst I can think of, is democracy.
Yes, and in order for it to work, whatever that means, the population has to be well educated,
enlightened, and
not
engaging.
I don't think
a democracy without an engaged population is pretty bad.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
especially coming from a communist country. There's in the class we talk so much about ways of governance, and it was a really good moment to discuss that with the student when I taught this. I think it was just when Trump was elected, and yeah, so there is a Confucian thinker, for instance, who says that the majority, the minds of the majority in the public is like it's that of an infant. So we can never trust the majority for important decisions, right? And then there is another thinker who was a legalist thinker who thinks that if the personality should be the last thing that matters, right? So what's important is actually to build the structure and the positions of power, so that even if we get someone like Trump, it doesn't matter, right? So it's kind of that thinker was going towards the more kind of building the system and the check and balance, right? The structure. And this is all happening in like 200 BC in China. All these very intense debates about ways of governing.
So interesting, and the time is really flying away. I'm really impressed that you are still awake, Rujing, but I think we need to find a close here.
We are way over bedtime.
And I'm sure we'll continue the philosophical discussions in the after work here. But let's try to find a close here as well. And perhaps we can start with you, Rujing. What's happening next in your life? Coming weeks, months, privately, professionally? What's happening?
Adjusting back to a Hong Kong Asian sleep cycle.
Yes. And we didn't help with that. Sorry for that.
Like I keep having very exciting events like this at midnight times in Europe and America. And it's hard to say no. Yeah. And so that's kind of making it difficult to adjust back. So yeah, I'm working on my first album, which is taking 10 years and hoping to call an end to that endless work. And so that's actually
is that coming out now? Is it going to be released like an album this year, you think? Are you there?
I really hope so. But I'm kind of a really crazy perfectionist, and I especially when I'm also producing my own music partially, and I'm like struggling for the 0.1 dB for like 2 months. So I'm just an insane person when it comes to production. So I should probably find an engineer and just not do it myself. So yeah, that's that album. And then research-wise, I have lots of kind of projects that's going on at the same time. I actually also started a little music startup in Hong Kong, so it's pretty crazy. But that's also happening. We're still trying to think about how to define what it is. But I have a good team and was kind of kind of doing the small music, creative, cultural. Arts brand in Hong Kong, and we'll do music will be part of it. And then AI Song Contest is busy doing its next preparing for the next edition. So,
when is the next? When is the how is it like a night like Eurovision Song Contest finale? When is that?
So it's usually it's in July when the final the award ceremony happens. And I think for this year we're trying to fix it for late July, or I think it's going to be in late July.
Cool.
Yeah, we're still working on that. It's going to be exciting, different partners, and I think we're going with this model of maybe every year having a different country as a host and moving to different continents. So
it should be a virtual country like GatherTown.
Yeah,
exactly.
Avatar country.
Exactly, like the conferences, the musicology big conferences.
Metaverse.
One physical conference here, and then a virtual GatherTown conference. Yeah, it's happening.
So many things happening there.
So cool.
But awesome. Bob, what's happening next in your life?
Tomorrow begins the vacation time where I'm going to be playing a lot of accordion, getting back to the machine-generated folk music.
You should have brought your accordion if we knew.
Yeah, that's why I brought the recordings. Research-wise, I am starting to organize the 2023 AI Music Generation Challenge. This is not the AI Song Contest.
Ooh.
This is a much more research-focused thing. But the theme of, or the challenge of 2020 was Irish jigs. 2021 was the Swedish slangpolska. 2022 was Irish reels.
Oh, okay.
2023 is going to be fake lore.
Fake? What is fake lore?
Fake lore is like folklore, but it's fake. And it's going to focus on using AI to generate music, legends, stories, costumes.
So we're going to go and we're not going to talk about the Vikings, but we're going to talk about the strikings.
Could be.
Could be.
How can someone find out more details about this? Are you going to publish something on KTH website or something?
There's GitHub pages or GitLab pages for every one of the challenges we've had. But if you look at my website, project website, themosaic.wordpress.com, you can find more information about the 2023 challenge soon.
That sounds like a
cliffhanger.
Yeah, awesome.
You need to come back here and show us the results.
Sure. I think we're going to organize a festival around the winning fake lore.
Yeah.
The winning fake lore.
So
because can you imagine, you know, we get the next Tolkien coming up here, you know, we had the whole world, right?
Yeah, we'll have scholars give talks on this fake lore and music performances and maybe plays. And
in the end, there might be a Tolkien in the making here.
Rujing, anyone that you would recommend to come on this podcast, someone that you like to listen to in a podcast like this?
I will think about that and I'll email their names to you for sure.
Okay, yeah, I mean, awesome.
Yeah, totally. I definitely have names in mind, and you know we can talk more about that. Yeah,
perfect. Looking forward to that. Bob, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would recommend some of my PhD students.
Yeah,
because you had lots of good conversations or questions about what PhD is about, and they're still quite young in their process, and so it might be nice perspectives to have from them.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. You have to give us a list at some point.
Certainly.
Bob and Rujing, I'm so impressed that you're still awake, and I love the discussion here. And also, you know, since I'm a big fan of going a bit more philosophical, and you really made that happen to an extent that we've never seen before. So thank you so much, Rujing, for staying up this late and for this discussion. It was awesome.
Total pleasure.
And Bob, you know, pleasure as usual. Looking forward to meeting you again. And yes, thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure to talk with you, Rujing.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for
awesome
getting
show.
me involved. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.